Okay, hello everyone. We'll go ahead and get started. Welcome and thank you for joining our webinar today, The Cloud Sourcing and How You Should Prepare. My name is Alexander Mazurek with Quint Wellington Redwood. I'll be your host during this session. So now I'd like to address the agenda for our topic today. I'm going to start off by introducing our organization, Quint Wellington Redwood. Then Us is going to address some of the challenges in a hyper-connected world. He's going to explain them to us. He's going to address the impact of the cloud. And then towards the end, he's going to cover all key takeaways and sort of summarize what he's trying to get at here. And at the end, like I asked, we will answer your questions. Just to cover some of our, our core businesses here, we cover consulting. We help businesses, implement some of these, initiatives that they seem to have either in sourcing or in lean or with their service management practices. We are also one of the largest IT training organizations in the world. Our academy covers that. We can train your organization in anything from ITIL to COBIT to Prince 2. And we also have a solutions business in which we license out some of our portfolio of courseware to other providers. Without any further ado, I'm going to introduce our presenter today, Us Pontnagel.
Thank you, Alexander. Hope everybody is having a good day. It's my pleasure to talk to you today and share some of the knowledge on the cloud and how this is affecting our business today. What we're looking at is today's world, as we describe that, as a hyper-connected world. A world where everything is connected and is interconnected. Business and society is basically interconnected to each other. We're looking at a world without boundaries. We're looking at business that is part of society and society is part of business. Having said that, we understand that within that connected world, information is key. And for us, the big question is, how do we utilize the information with the help of technology? We're seeing the evolution of SMAC, which is the abbreviation for social media, mobile technologies, analytics, and cloud. Basically, we are looking at three dimensions of what we call human-centric evolution. We're looking at people, information, and infrastructure. If you look at people, we're basically looking at the human empowerment. We need to connect people, we need to empower them to use information, which basically is the same as social innovation. If we look at the information, then we're looking at creative intelligence. We create knowledge from intelligence and we give the people the possibility to do that, which also means that they can use that to innovate, which brings them to innovate business. To make sure that that all happens, we need to have a connected infrastructure, which means connect everything and optimize business and social infrastructures. Which again means that if you do that, you need to address the ICT values. ICT values in this perspective are flexibility, agility, and business continuity. ICT optimization is possible in the cloud because we are looking at on-demand everything, because we are saying provide all that is requested, which means we have an enormous amount of people and endpoints, and if we are looking at that, we are sure that that will impact things that we have in place, like our sourcing strategy. Where do we get things from? How do we select? How do we contract? And how do we guarantee an end-to-end service integration? In a nutshell, the question basically drops down to what is the challenge to keep control over all this? If the hyper-connected world is demanding the availability of everything, in this case information or data, anywhere, anytime, and on any device, we are basically looking at availability. We're looking at access, we're looking internet-centric. That will change the way of providing information. It will change the way of storage, the ways of archiving, and obviously also the way of securing data. Not only securing them, but also the new way of providing data, because we need it to be easy, accessible. It needs to be available anywhere, any place, on any device. which means that we are now saying that means per definition cloud. That seems to be the solution. Having said that, the question is cloud a buzzword? Is it a hype? Are we looking at a marketing term for what we call low-cost service provision? Maybe we're talking about a sort of a charade to cover what's actually behind it, because maybe it's in basis not more or anything else than infra as a service, platform as a service, or software as a service. For our definition, we would like to agree that cloud basically is a service provision channel. A channel that makes us available on demand everything and all that is requested. But if we agree that it is a new channel, then the question arises if we should impose our traditional rules and regulations upon what we call this new kid on the block. Or should we, on the other hand, accept that this new channel apparently has its own dynamics and therefore rules and regulations, so not imply what is old-fashioned up to the new kid. Looking at the cloud, then we are all talking about the cloud and everything is coming from the cloud and we are all working with the cloud. However, if we look at recent cloud computing research done, in this case in the Netherlands, we see that there is a lot of reluctance coming from the IT professional market to adopt to the cloud. We see things like level of security that is offered is not enough or is not clear enough, for therefore we are reluctant to go to the cloud. The privacy of data, we are seeing the lack of laws and regulations, or what we believe to be specifically laws and regulations that apply to cloud and cloud services. Current environment is not suitable. We are not suitable for cloud environment, and that's not only a technical environment but also a governance environment. And obviously there is part of this fear of vendor dependency, the vendor lock-in. Not so much the choice of one vendor as well as the situation that we bring something to the cloud and we're not very sure where things are, and therefore we are very much connected to this one cloud provider. If you then see what cloud basically does, it takes care of shifts into specific environments of our service provision. If we look at service design, to name a few, we basically see that service catalog management is changing. It is very difficult to keep track of all different cloud services. So managing your internal service catalog and the service catalog in a normal contractual relationship with a service provider is clearly changing. And as a single consistent source of information, the service catalog possibly that you are used to is not going to be valid anymore. If we're looking at service level management, we have this interesting part that cloud services and everything that is behind it apparently is considered to be a black box, which makes it very difficult to do traditional service level agreement monitoring. If you look at information security management, we are seeing that there is a shift in the way we are looking at security. Security is not the same for cloud services, where security in the traditional way is something that we can actually touch, we can actually identify and see, where this apparently in cloud services is different. The other one is that supplier management is also going to be infected, because as organizations use more and more cloud service providers, and cloud service providers are going to be multiple, that obviously will mean that the importance of supplier management is going to increase for the organizations. If we look at service strategy, what is impacting service strategy by cloud? Cloud obviously is a model that from a financial perspective is focused on pay-as-you-go. That basically means that we are looking at the planning in a different way from a financial perspective. Pay-as-you-go is shorter cycles, and if we take shorter cycles into account, our financial planning will have to adapt accordingly. If we look at service portfolio management, if we are seeing that cloud services are easy accessible, that means that our service portfolio is easy to be extended. The way we manage our service portfolio is therefore going to be changed. It is also going to be changed because we now more or less centrally, if at all, manage the service portfolio, while we are now walking into a situation that anyone within our company, be it in business or private, with the swipe of a credit card can actually contract cloud services, which makes it apparently much more difficult to do service portfolio management. Demand management, that will change because we are also looking at cloud as a computing form that basically is a new way of outsourcing. And that also means that parts of what is normal in outsourcing are not going to be standard anymore as part of cloud services. The interesting part with supply management is again that exit strategy in the traditional way will have to change because we are not exiting in the traditional way of a service provider. We are more going to exit and make sure that we take back our data, and the rest will basically be somewhere in the cloud. If we look at transition, impact of cloud, service management, one of the things is that cloud service providers use internal development cycles, which basically means that you as an individual client cannot control the service management cycles. If you look at cloud service providers and basically look at public cloud service providers, then obviously there are so many clients that service portfolio management on a client basis is something that is basically impossible to do. Giving the point back of the previous mentioned one, controlled by individual clients, releases for cloud services is basically something that for an individual client will be completely uncontrollable. And last but not least, cloud service providers make extensive use of virtualization, and that will basically result in a vast number of virtual assets, which also means that if that is part of what you are doing, supply management is going to change drastically. The impact on operations, event management. Events can occur outside the premises. Event management should be extended to include cloud services because apparently it is now going to be taking place somewhere outside, and even that outside is not going to be easy to identify. If you look at incident management basically is something that you should broker to the cloud service provider and with multiple cloud service providers, which also means that you have to bring this role to an external party that is different in the way you contract this party. Problem management also going to change in the sense that the traditional root cause analysis will be much more complex when you are looking at the proper measures that you want to take into precaution to resolve problems or to take into consideration for unresolved problems. Another aspect of operations will be access management. The responsibilities and authorizations that you basically take into account for access management will, in a cloud service provision, be or have to be reconsidered. The impact on the service operations. The purpose of service operation is, as part of a definition, to deliver agreed levels of service to users and customers and to manage the applications, technology and infrastructure that support delivery of services. Impact of cloud computing will mean that the technical management of applications, technology and infrastructure will have to shift to this cloud service provider. And that would mean that the IT organization shifting that to the cloud service provider needs to understand that they should shift and become a cloud broker or the aggregator of cloud services, which means that they will be much more directing and ultimately have to think in ways of service orchestration. If you look at the players in the field, as a customer you will demand for integrated service provision out of the cloud. You will be, or you will look for an integrator, or you will look for a broker that takes care of the integration. The question will be if you accept that these roles will be provided by one and the same service provider, and where this service provider is going to be taking care of the position of an integrator, and which of the service providers as cloud service provider would then be the service integrator. And if you are a service provider, then the question is, are you just a cloud service provider, or would you also be the cloud service integrator, or would you also be willing as a prime contractor to be the cloud service broker? If we look at it from a sourcing perspective, then from a sourcing strategy perspective, traditionally we are looking at four main questions. We are basically saying, why are we looking at this from a sourcing perspective? So what are our objectives that we are trying to achieve? What is in scope? The who question basically relates to the vendor profiling and the specific vendor in place. And the how is the way we're going to contract the sourcing at the end of the day. If we look at cloud, then the very basic questions from sourcing strategy are impacted. The why basically stays the same. The what, the scope is a scope that needs to transfer to a yes or no existing cloud service. The who is obviously going to be the question, what is the vendor profile I'm looking for? Is the vendor profile for a cloud service provision a different vendor profile than the traditional one? If I look at the how, then basically we still have to look into the situation that the traditional house is impacted. We are looking at a different match, and we're looking at differences in partnership and confidence. If we look at the who, we are basically looking at the fact that we are looking for a person to engage with. We are talking about relationship as in getting married. We personalize, we are looking at personal responsibility, and the accountability is basically transferred to somebody else. The problem with cloud could be that we cannot identify and personalize anymore, which means that we need to accept that the rules and regulations of cloud will determine that we have to accept the new dynamics of cloud as into the governance. So sourcing strategy can adapt to be a cloud service strategy. We have to address things like data classification, risk analysis, and types of cloud where you have private, public, and hybrid. We basically should address this with a decision tree. We should take into consideration that scoping and sourcing is in line, and it should be linked to the vendor profiling. Basically meaning take into consideration your data, look at what data is classified, how you classify that, and which classification could be addressed by what kind of cloud. As a guideline for cloud service strategy, we are saying that a good service strategy needs to take the characteristics of cloud computing into account, which means that the service strategy of any service provider must be grounded upon a fundamental acknowledgement that the customer do not buy products, but the customer buys satisfaction of a particular need. Cloud is a pure service. Basically, its underlying technology should not be seen and should be considered as a black box. And cloud basically is a combination of managed service and a utility of a provision model, which means that taking that into consideration, you should differently look at your sourcing strategy, but also different at the way you are going to contract this. If you buy a cloud service or you buy a service from the cloud, that means that you will be contracting in a different format. The one size fits all with a little as possible customization is one of the items that we see in cloud services. Cloud is coming off the shelf and there is little room for your specific requirements. We are also seeing that next to pay-as-you-go, we are also looking at shorter term contracts. And shorter term contracts with pay-as-you-go basically also are looking at easy exit. We're not having very difficult constructions for retransitions. It's basically take out the data and that ends the relationship. That means that cloud computing requires certain contractual terms that we need to address differently. Things like a service level agreement specific to a contract and provider's rights to change the service needs to be reconsidered. We need to understand that data storage, protection and ownership is going to be addressed differently. Where, how and what kind of security provisions have to adapt to this. We have an interruption of services and consequences. How do we handle the interruption of services in a cloud environment where we do not exactly know where the environment is? Termination options and effects means that we need to take into consideration that termination is going to be different. If you look at software as a service, it is difficult to partially terminate, and that needs to be taken into consideration with a cloud service. If we live in an environment where we basically need to be able to audit something, or we have to take into consideration company rules and regulations with audit requirements, then we need to understand that cloud services will react differently on the traditional audit approaches and requirements. If you look at contracting, anything that we basically see as geographically determined and therefore also geographically pinpointed on the legislation, we need to understand that that's going to be different. We sometimes do not even know where the cloud services resides. We do not know where the cloud services actually come from, and it will be very difficult to take into consideration the traditional way of taking into consideration geography and legislation. And last but not least, the same thing applies to intellectual property rights. In a way, you can say anything that's out there is basically out there, which means how do you actually safeguard the fact that what you put in a cloud environment intellectually is yours, and how do you protect what is yours when it's out there and you don't even know where it is. The bottom line, cloud is a service provision channel that opens new services and new service providers, which means that you will have a lot of things that are easy to get, easy to access, easy pricing constructions, a large number of providers, a momentum where you can very quickly connect to new service providers and disconnect to service providers, which in the traditional world is obviously not as simple. But nevertheless, you will still have to scope and select the service provider. And you still need end-to-end service provisions, and that needs to work for you. And at the end of the day, you need to governance the control of your service providers. You will still have to do contract management, vendor management. If you look at the governance, the question would be, what do we want to control and why do we want to control this? In IP and privacy, we're looking at competitive edge. But if you are saying that all that you have digitalized is out there, then the question would be, are we not fake security? Of course, for the time being, we have to safeguard and assure usage is according to rules and regulations. And that is, for us, the reason why we want and need to have control. but we need to take into consideration if we are actually trying to control something that is controllable or still needs to be controlled. We therefore are looking at the governance for new consumption and delivery models like cloud, which means continuous alignment for fast changing service requirements and a relationship management with cloud service providers that we regard differently, but they also regard us as customers in a different way. So the question is, how do we control that? And the question for us basically is answered with, you adapt your governance to the dynamics of the cloud. You accept the dynamics and all the privileges you get, but you also need to understand that your governance needs to adapt to this. If I look to the key takeaways from this presentation, I basically would say cloud computing is mainly a technology development. And if that would be the case, takeaway for me would be that's not true. Cloud computing is a combination of technological advancements and socio-economic changes. It is much more than technology, but it is also not only social economic. It is a service provision channel, and that impacts the answers to what we're doing, who is doing that, and how we are doing that if we look at it from a cloud sourcing strategy point of view. Which means that a company should have a sourcing strategy, but also should in her sourcing strategy incorporate cloud services specific requirements. That would be mandatory, looking at the fact that cloud is a reality and it's not going to go away. And in that sense, it is also advisable to look at cloud from a decision tree perspective to make sure that the decision tree to get to what kind of cloud you could take into consideration should be part of your sourcing strategy. The end-to-end service provision requires integration, regardless of where that is or whom is going to provide it. So take into consideration when cloud services are part of your portfolio, that end-to-end service provision needs to be ruled somewhere and it needs to be integrated. And last but not least, adapt your governance to the dynamics of the cloud. Accept the governance instead of regulations, which basically means governance is the way you handle this, and that is more than just taking into consideration the standardized rules and regulations. So that will conclude my presentation for you today.
I just wanted to thank everyone for joining us here today. We at Quint hope that you found this session both educational and informative. Please check out our website, www.quintgroup.com, more and get more access to some of our upcoming webinars. We are going to have one next week on transitioning from staff augmentation to a managed services format as far as sourcing goes. And also on our website, we have a bunch of white papers, blog posts, and other thought-provoking material on sourcing, IT service management, lean IT, and more. If you have any questions regarding some of the subject matter today, or have any questions about Quint in general, always feel free to reach out to us, and even ask for us directly if you want to discuss the cloud or sourcing if you would like. Otherwise, thank you everyone for joining us today. Have a great day.